You're violating community decorum by placing that many chairs outside. And balloons? Absolutely not. This is a neighborhood, not a carnival.
That was Cynthia Bellamy, president of the Willow Bend Ridge HOA, hands on hips, sunglasses perched like a crown of entitlement. She stood at the edge of our driveway, glaring at the pastel ribbons fluttering in the breeze. My wife, Kayla, 7 months pregnant and radiant in a soft blue dress, froze mid-laugh. I stepped forward. "This is our backyard. We submitted the guest list, parking map, even the shade tent diagram. You signed off 2 weeks ago." She scoffed, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Then I changed my mind. A couple of people near the catering van turned their heads. Cynthia wasn't embarrassed. She smirked. "I have the right to override if I believe it disturbs the neighborhood aesthetic. I'll be filing a non-compliance report by sundown." I didn't flinch. "Then I guess it'll be interesting when the county planning office reviews the footage and re-examines your own zoning exemption for that patio extension you built last summer. You remember, the one without a permit?" Her smirk cracked. "Subscribe now." Because Cynthia Bellamy isn't just making trouble. She's about to detonate a public disaster. And she doesn't know what I do for a living, or what I've already filed. My name is Elias Varick. I'm a structural liability auditor for high-risk insurance networks. That means I know every loophole in construction codes and property liability law, especially what voids an HOA's insurance protections. More importantly, this house isn't just a home. It's where Kayla and I finally started over after losing our first pregnancy. The maple tree by the fence? Her dad planted it the day we moved in. The baby shower was more than a celebration. It was closure, a moment to mark healing in the space that held our grief. So when Cynthia walked in uninvited, clipboard tucked under her elbow like a weapon, I didn't just see HOA overreach. I saw a threat to my wife's health, our peace, and the memory of everything we rebuilt. She didn't knock. She just barked orders at my sister arranging the cake table. "Any unregistered guest will be trespassing," Cynthia snapped. "You're trespassing," I told her calmly, stepping between her and Kayla. Cynthia's eyes flicked to the flower arch near the back fence. Her lips curled. "That structure's non-compliant. It violates height restrictions and wasn't submitted for review. It'll have to be removed immediately." "That arch?" Kayla built it by hand with her best friend Lila, who died in a hit-and-run 2 months ago. They started it the day they found out Kayla was expecting again. Every curve, every bloom was a piece of her memory. It stood in our yard like a promise. "No," Kayla whispered, one hand on her belly. "Actually," I said, pulling my phone from my back pocket, "per Article 4, Section 8, anything under 7 feet for temporary family events is exempt, and the base is freestanding, not dug in, meaning it's not a structural modification." I documented the entire build and time-stamped the footage. Cynthia's face flushed. Behind her, I noticed a familiar figure hesitate near the property line, Milo Radek, the HOA's youngest board member, and a local substitute teacher. He looked uneasy, glancing between Cynthia and the guests. "Milo," Cynthia barked, "I want you to record this violation, now." He didn't move. That's when it happened, the worst of it. Kayla had just turned to sit. She'd been on her feet too long, when Cynthia stormed forward, shouting about the liability of unstable decorations. Her heel caught a lawn flag, and she stumbled. Then, in a flash of frustration, she grabbed a folded chair and hurled it sideways in some clumsy attempt to yank it from a stack. But the momentum was wild. The chair flew, straight into Kayla's side. The sound of the impact was sickening. Not loud, just wrong. She gasped, doubled over, screamed. I was there in an instant, catching her, heart in my throat. People rushed. Someone called 911. I couldn't move. I just held her, whispering her name, willing her to breathe. Cynthia froze, clipboard still in her hand, horror dawning. But she didn't say a word. Milo stepped forward, his phone now recording. Every second after that was a blur. But I already knew. Cynthia had just committed the worst HOA violation imaginable, and this time, I was the one pressing charges. The paramedics moved fast, their voices tight but steady as they lifted Kayla onto the stretcher. Her hands clutched the edge of the blanket, knuckles white, breaths shallow. I stayed close enough to feel the cold metal of the rails brushing my fingers, but not close enough to get in their way. Every instinct I had screamed at me to hold her, to shield her, to undo the last 5 minutes, but all I could do was keep pace as they loaded her into the ambulance. Milo hovered by the gate, pale and shaken. His phone was still recording even though his hand trembled. They got it on video, he said quietly when I passed him. Everything. The angle's clear. She can't lie her way out of this. But I didn't answer. My world had narrowed to the rising and falling of Kayla's chest inside that ambulance. I climbed in, the door shut behind us, and the sirens erupted as we pulled away. At the hospital, fluorescent lights and antiseptic air swallowed us whole. Nurses guided me into the high-risk maternity evaluation wing while they whisked Kayla into a curtained room. I heard bits of the medical jargon, the kind designed to both inform and terrify. Abdominal trauma, fetal heart variability, internal bruising suspected. I tried to focus on my breathing, but every inhale felt like gravel. I wasn't alone in the waiting area for long. Guests from the baby shower began trickling in. Lila's mother, our neighbors from 2 doors down, even the caterer, people I barely knew but who had stood there, who had seen the horror of a celebration turning into an emergency. One woman sat beside me. "She threw it," she whispered. "I saw her. Cynthia knew what she was doing. You're not imagining it." Another neighbor, James, stood in front of me, arms crossed. "You're not the only one she's come after. Last winter she fined me for noise pollution because my kids laughed too loud building a snowman. She's been escalating." His voice shook with something deeper. Fear, exhaustion, the relief of finally saying it aloud. I looked up at him. "And nobody reported her?" He shrugged helplessly. "People are scared. She always threatens fines, restricting access. She's ruined events before, but nothing like this." As more stories came out, I felt the room shift, not physically, but in tone. It wasn't just us. It wasn't just today. Cynthia had been weaponizing authority for years, and everyone had been trying to survive it quietly. When my sister arrived, still in her apron from the dessert table, she sat down next to me and told me the one thing I hadn't known. "Eli, that memory arch, Cynthia already tried to have it removed last week." My jaw tightened. "What?" "She came by when you were out. Told Kayla the arch undermined the aesthetic continuity of the neighborhood. Kayla begged her to let it stay for just 1 day, just the shower." I closed my eyes, the puzzle pieces clicking together. This wasn't random. It wasn't impulsive. Cynthia had been trying to fracture the event from the moment she learned it was happening. A nurse stepped out then, scanning the waiting area. "Family of Kayla Varick." I stood so fast the chair screeched. "That's me. She's stable. The baby's heart rate is normal for now, but we're continuing monitoring. There's bruising, but no immediate signs of placental detachment." My lungs finally loosened enough to take a full breath. "You can see her," the nurse said, "one at a time." When I stepped into her room, she looked small against the white sheets, her hair scattered across the pillow, still beautiful, still fighting. Her hand reached for mine immediately. "She meant to do it," she whispered, voice ragged. "I saw her face, Eli. She didn't slip. She was angry." I squeezed her fingers, my own throat burning. "I know," and I did. I had replayed the moment in my mind 100 times on the drive here. The arc of the chair, the torque of Cynthia's wrist, the angle of impact. My brain was already mapping it like a reconstruction model, whether I wanted it to or not. A doctor entered, speaking quietly about the next few hours being critical. They'd be monitoring her and the baby closely. Movement restrictions, observation intervals, possible overnight stay. I nodded. I answered questions. I asked a few. But in the back of my mind, deep beneath the fear, something colder was forming, a clarity I recognized from every high-risk investigation I'd ever been part of. Cynthia hadn't just caused an accident. She had committed an avoidable, reckless action in a shared space with documented interference and prior incidents. And I knew exactly what that meant for liability, investigation chains, and insurance exposure. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was provable. I spent the next 3 hours at the hospital, pacing and measured circuits between Kayla's room and the vending machines. Every half hour, a nurse would update me. No contractions, fetal heart rate stable, her blood pressure holding. Each status felt like a fragile win on a tightrope. But even relief came laced with fire. Because while Kayla was in a hospital bed with bruises across her abdomen, Cynthia Winslow hadn't even been arrested. That wouldn't last. I called Detective Jorah Lynn. She answered on the second ring. Varick, what's going on? I told her everything in clinical detail. My tone was flat, precise. I stuck to facts, timeline, witnesses, angle of impact, threat history. I didn't let emotion color it, and I didn't need to. Jorah had worked with me back when I was still wearing the badge, back before I stepped down to focus on my family and my teaching. She understood the subtext. You've got security footage? She asked. I nodded even though she couldn't see it. 2 phones, one from my nephew, one from a guest across the yard. Both captured the throw. Both show her aiming. Jorah let out a long breath. Send it to me. I'll have it entered as evidence before she finishes her glass of wine tonight. She's still at home? She's the HOA president, Eli. She's claiming the chair slipped while she was trying to assist a falling centerpiece. She's lying, I figured, especially since we already got a neighbor report from earlier that day. She came by and tried to shut the party down before it started. No permit needed, but she screamed about it anyway. Same archway, same decorations. So she had made 2 attempts, one verbal, one violent. When I got back into Kyla's room, she was asleep. The fetal monitor beeped softly beside her, rhythmic and reassuring. I kissed her forehead, then stepped out quietly to make another call, this time to a lawyer. Not for us. For the civil suit, I was already preparing. By morning, the hospital cleared Kayla for release with a written order for bed rest and restricted movement. They offered to send a nurse out twice a week. I took the number, but already knew I'd be handling most of it myself. At home, the aftermath of the baby shower still littered the yard, like a ghost of joy interrupted. Streamers tangled in the grass, gift bags untouched. The archway, still standing, still laced with sunflowers and silk, stood tall like a promise I refused to let her destroy. I walked straight to it and sat on the bench beneath it. Then I waited. I knew she'd come, and she did. Cynthia's heels clicked against the sidewalk like a metronome of entitlement. She wore a pearl-colored jacket, HOA-issued badge clipped to the lapel like it gave her divine rights. Her mouth was tight, controlled. I heard Kayla was released, she said, tone coldly polite. I'm glad, truly. It was an unfortunate incident. You threw a chair at a pregnant woman. I was startled. The tablecloth caught on my shoe. I tripped. It's all a misunderstanding. I looked at her for a long moment. You've met my son, haven't you? I asked, her brow furrowed. Yes, briefly, at the fall cleanup event. Milo recorded you, along with 2 others. I sent it to the precinct. You're under investigation for felony assault. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. That footage will be reviewed in context. My lawyer is confident. Mine too, especially since your attempt to remove this archway last week is also documented. And your prior complaints, and the fact that this wasn't your first attempt to interfere with the event. This structure violates community uniformity, she snapped. I warned you. You ignored official orders. It was up for one afternoon, for my wife and our child, and you threw a chair into her stomach to make your point. I told you. It slipped. No, I interrupted, standing slowly. You aimed. The silence stretched between us like a trigger waiting to be pulled. She searched my face for something. Fear, hesitation, maybe mercy. But I had none left to give. You'll be removed from the board, I said flatly. There are already enough signatures for an emergency vote. Her expression cracked for a split second, the ice beneath her fracturing. And the restraining order goes into effect by noon, I added. You're not to come within 50 feet of this property. You think you can come into this community and... I was here before you ever got a seat on that board, I cut in. This is my house. That's my wife. And you picked the wrong family to turn into an example. Cynthia said nothing, just turned and walked away. But I didn't watch her go. I sat back beneath the arch and waited for what came next. The restraining order hit the HOA office before noon, and by 3 the community group chat was chaos. Screenshots of Cynthia's letter, typed, printed, and hand-signed, circulated like wildfire. She was officially barred from entering my property or contacting my family, pending the investigation. But anyone who thought that would slow her down had never seen how control addicts operate when they lose power. By sunset, she'd called an emergency HOA review session. The email arrived in my inbox at 6:03 p.m. Subject line: Immediate Compliance Review. Property, Chapter 27B. My property. The very one she was legally forbidden to approach. I almost laughed. Almost. Kayla was resting upstairs when I printed the notice. The tone was familiar, tight, performative legalese masquerading as professionalism. She accused me of falsifying safety permits, weaponizing HOA protocols, and endangering public tranquility. It was the kind of bureaucratic threat meant to look legitimate enough to intimidate anyone who didn't know how policy and liability actually worked. Unfortunately for her, that's my entire career. The next morning, I drove to the HOA office. The place sat at the edge of the ridge, a tidy single-story building with glass doors and fake ferns, like an imitation of authority. Inside, I found Silas Rannick, the compliance officer. He looked startled when he saw me, but didn't tell me to leave. Instead, he closed the blinds and motioned me to keep my voice down. "She's not supposed to be here," he said quietly. "But she's in the back. She won't listen to reason." "Good," I said. "I don't need her to listen. I just need her to document what she's about to do." Silas frowned. "You're recording?" "Always." He hesitated, then opened a file drawer and slid a thin binder across the counter. "You didn't get this from me," he said. "It's the complaint draft she's submitting tonight. She typed it this morning, before the injunction notice even cleared the system." I flipped it open. Page after page of falsified claims, accusing me of aggressive behavior, tampering with evidence, manipulating witnesses. My name appeared 17 times, followed by words like threatening, combative, unfit resident. But there was something more interesting buried near the bottom, an attachment log. Each of the violations she referenced included media files, timestamps, photographs, inspection tags, except every tag listed the same origin ID. Device C2109, her device. The HOA president's tablet, the same one she used to sign off event permits and file compliance reports, meaning every image, every edit, every submission tied directly to her digital signature. "Silas," I said slowly, "you realize this means she fabricated violations using her own account credentials?" He nodded once, looking sick. "I know. She told me she'd clean the files before the audit." She didn't. His eyes flicked to the office door. "You can't quote me on any of this." "I don't need to. The metadata will speak louder than either of us." He exhaled, shoulders sagging. "I just wanted this job to be boring," he murmured. When I stepped outside, the rain had started, thin cold drops hitting the hood of my jacket like static. I drove home in silence, already planning the chain of custody. If I could verify the metadata trail from her device to the HOA cloud, I could prove she not only lied in her complaint, but also tampered with official records. That's more than misconduct. It's fraud. At home, Kayla was sitting upright on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. She looked pale but alert. "Did she stop?" she asked. "Not yet," I said, kneeling beside her. "But she just gave me exactly what I needed." Kayla's hand drifted to her belly. "You're sure it's safe to push back right now?" "It's safer than letting her define the truth." I didn't tell her that Cynthia's complaint had already been copied to the HOA insurer. The insurer would now have to investigate not just the injury, but the governance structure that allowed it. And that meant pulling every audit file, every authorization, every device ID linked to HOA reports. Cynthia thought she'd scare me into silence, but she'd just handed me her fingerprints in data form. And if there's one thing I know better than anyone, it's how evidence behaves when exposed to light. By the time the rain stopped, I had already started the digital trace. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of my desktop tower, now running a forensic metadata scrub on the files Silas had given me. Each attachment Cynthia submitted carried hidden details. EXEF timestamps, user authentication tags, geolocation traces. She might have been careful editing the images, but she'd underestimated how much raw data stayed behind when you don't know how to purge system-level metadata. I sipped cold coffee and stared at the screen. There it was, one photo she'd claimed was taken at 4:15 p.m., showing my garden lights supposedly installed in violation of community aesthetics, was actually time-stamped 8:42 a.m., with the angle of sunlight betraying her lie. Another proof photo of me verbally threatening her? The video clip had no audio. She'd trimmed the footage to exclude her walking toward my property line, on the very day she was restrained from doing so. My cursor hovered over the file name, violation 27B camproof 4.move. The raw video data had been compressed, but not scrubbed. There, in the stream log, her device signature, C26109, and the internal tag, edit performed 13 minutes after initial capture. That was enough to prove tampering. Maybe not in a criminal court yet, but in civil liability? Absolutely, especially for someone sitting in a governance role like HOA president. Downstairs, Kayla shifted in her sleep. The meds the ER doctor prescribed helped with the physical pain, but the emotional shock lingered behind her eyes like a bruise no one could see. It wasn't just the assault, it was the humiliation. She hadn't cried, not once. But I could tell she hadn't exhaled fully since that day on the porch. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I picked up. "Mr. Rourke?" a man asked. "Speaking." "This is Detective Graff with District Investigations. I'm calling regarding the restraining order filed against Janice Holloway. We received some documentation this morning from the HOA's compliance office. Says you've submitted evidence of misconduct?" "Not yet," I said slowly. "But I'm compiling a full metadata trail." "Why?" "Well," Graff continued, "we received a secondary report from Ms. Holloway this morning. She's filed a counter-complaint. Claims you falsified documents to block her access to HOA duties." I nearly laughed. "Let me guess, she forgot to remove her device tags again?" "Actually, that's what raised our eyebrows," he admitted. "The timestamps and credentials conflict. We're not ready to make a move, but your name came up on our escalation list. I figured I'd get ahead of it. Can I come by and collect what you have?" I agreed and sent over the preliminary scrub log while we spoke. He whistled low when I described the alterations. "She edited formal reports and submitted them as evidence?" "Correct, all sourced from her tablet." "And you have a live chain of custody?" "Yes, starting from the file's creation on HOA's internal drive all the way to her submission time." There was a long silence. Then the detective said, "If half of this checks out, it won't just be civil penalties. That's evidence tampering. She's going to need a lawyer." "She already thinks she's above consequence," I said. Graff exhaled. "People like that always do, until the records speak louder than they do." We agreed he'd come by the next morning. He wanted copies of the full scrub logs, metadata headers, and access audit trails. I'd already built a clean folder hierarchy with screen recordings of my process, labeled and time-stamped. By noon, I got another ping, this time from an HOA group chat that I normally muted, but the message preview caught my eye. "Emergency security review due to recent incidents. Voting members required." I opened the thread. It was Cynthia trying to convene a vote of no confidence against me, claiming I had intimidated witnesses and compromised internal processes. She wanted me off the HOA advisory email list. She even tagged Silas to pressure him to support the vote. But Silas didn't respond. Instead, another name replied, Omar Feldman. Omar was the board's vice chair, older, quiet, the kind of man who rarely showed his hand. But now he typed slowly and deliberately, "I have reviewed the incident reports and metadata trail provided by Mr. Rourke. I suggest we suspend all administrative activity until the investigation concludes. Any action taken now could be interpreted as retaliatory." Cynthia went silent. That silence lasted 5 hours. Long enough for me to finish the final export logs. Long enough for me to feel, for the first time since Kayla's injury, that the tide was shifting. Not because I yelled louder, but because truth doesn't flinch when cornered. By sunrise, I had already printed 2 copies of the full evidence packet. One for Detective Graff, one for my personal records, sealed in a plastic envelope tucked under the floorboard safe, next to Kayla's birth certificate and the deed to our home. The porch swing creaked under my weight as I waited. It had become a sort of ritual lately. The swing Kayla and I had built together 3 summers ago, sanded down to perfection, stained with marine-grade oil, and lined with a cushion she stitched herself. After her fall, she hadn't sat on it once. I glanced down the street. Janice's silver Range Rover was parked crooked in her driveway again. Her porch light flicked off at exactly 6:01 a.m., just like it always did. Precise, predictable, controlled. A woman obsessed with appearing composed while unraveling beneath the surface. At 6:27 sharp, a black sedan pulled into my driveway. Detective Graff stepped out, a tablet under his arm, and a calm, steady presence that immediately registered as someone who didn't like wasting time. We shook hands, exchanged nods. "I parked 2 houses down," he said. "Didn't want to stir the pot." "You're already late then?" I said dryly and gestured him inside. Kayla was still asleep upstairs. I'd left a sticky note on her door. "Meeting downstairs. Don't come out unless you hear my voice." She hated being excluded, but I needed her safe from any more fallout. Inside the study, I laid out the files, screen captures, and time-stamped audio files. Graf reviewed each piece with methodical patience. Every few minutes, he muttered affirmations. "This is clean. She didn't even encrypt that. Yeah, she's toast." Then he tapped one document and paused. "This here," he said, pointing at a board meeting summary Cynthia claimed to have submitted. "It's signed by 4 members. Only 2 were present that day," I replied. "You got proof?" "Better. I have security badge logs and parking gate records. Only Cynthia and Paul Nguyen badged in." Graf looked impressed. "And you say Nguyen's the one who looked shaken at the last vote?" "He's the conflicted one. Keeps his head down, but he's starting to see it's not just strict policy anymore. It's personal." Graf nodded. "Every group's got a Paul, but they only switch sides when the damage touches them, or someone they care about." He leaned back in the chair. "All right, I'm going to recommend an immediate injunction to suspend Janice and Cynthia's administrative access, pending review. That doesn't mean full charges yet, but it'll freeze their authority until the legal review board gets involved." I didn't exhale until I heard those words. "They're going to fight it," I said. "Let them. If they push now, it'll just tighten the noose, especially if they touch that little girl again." His voice darkened. "I've read Kayla's medical report. That was no accident." Silence settled between us. Then Graf added, "Has she spoken about it yet?" I shook my head. "She's been trying to process it on her own. She journals. Sometimes. But she hasn't said a word about that day." Graf stood. "She doesn't have to. Not yet. The data speaks louder." After he left, I sat alone in the study and stared at the porch swing through the window. Kayla hadn't touched it since the fall. She'd limped past it every morning, flinching slightly, like it was her own shame. I opened the front door, stepped outside, and walked straight to the swing. Then, I lowered myself onto the cushion and looked toward Janice's house. And waited. At exactly 7:13 a.m., her front door creaked open. She stepped out, sunglasses on, robe fluttering in the wind. She stopped mid-step when she saw me sitting there. Her jaw clenched. She didn't wave, didn't blink. Just watched. I let my arm rest along the back of the swing. I didn't move, didn't smirk, didn't gloat. I just watched her watching me. The swing groaned quietly beneath me. It was still sturdy, still standing, and for the first time since the fall, I realized, so were we. I found Kayla on the back patio later that morning, barefoot, sitting cross-legged on the cool slate tile with her back to me. A half-finished sketch rested in her lap, a charcoal outline of our porch swing, drawn with delicate lines and unspoken meaning. She didn't look up when she said, "You sat on it today." My breath caught. "Yeah, I figured it was time." Silence. Then she added, "I almost sat on it yesterday, but I couldn't. I kept hearing her voice." Her hand tightened on the pencil, telling me to move, telling me I didn't belong there. And then the metal clinked, and then I hit the ground. I stepped closer, crouching beside her. "You didn't fall because you were weak. You were pushed, Kayla." The only shame in that moment belonged to her. She finally looked up at me. Her eyes were dry, but something had shifted in them. Less fear, more control. She said, "She still walks past like nothing happened." "Not for much longer," I said. "Detective Graf submitted the injunction request this morning. It's already processing. She'll be suspended soon." Kayla nodded, then held up her sketch. "I'm going to finish this, and then I'm going to frame it. That way, I don't avoid it anymore." My throat tightened. Good. We stayed there for a while, under the early sun. Then, my phone buzzed. A message from Graf. Preliminary injunction filed. Access to HOA funds and internal systems, suspended for Winslow and Sanchez. Review in 72 HRS will keep you posted. I showed the message to Kayla. She exhaled, slow and long. Does that mean they can't touch the neighborhood records? Not anymore, and if they try, it'll flag instantly. But I knew this wasn't the end. not even close. That afternoon, as Kayla worked on her sketch, I opened the community bylaws and reread every clause about emergency powers and board member removal. Then, I sent Paul Nguyen a carefully worded email, neutral tone, strictly legal, subject, community meeting request, HOA Emergency Article 9 review. Paul didn't reply right away, but when he did, it wasn't with words, it was with action. At 4:17 p.m., a new event appeared on the HOA calendar. Emergency open board session, Community Hall, 6 p.m. Tomorrow I stared at it for a full minute before the implications hit. Paul was calling a vote, not to remove Janice directly. He wasn't brave enough for that yet. But he was forcing a community forum to discuss the pending injunction. If I played this right, I could do what Janice feared most, turn the community against her. The next 24 hours were preparation. I printed handouts, nothing dramatic, just facts. Side-by-side comparisons of budget misallocations, records of abuse of authority, security footage freeze frames showing Janice hovering over Kayla just before the incident, HOA policy excerpts. Everything that had been twisted in shadow, I was going to drag into daylight. By 5:30 p.m., the next evening, the community hall was already filling. Older couples, newer families, parents who'd never dared to question HOA decisions. Everyone was there, murmuring, confused. The room buzzed with unease, and something else I hadn't heard in a long time, curiosity. I stood at the back, waiting, not drawing attention to myself. Kayla had stayed home by choice. She didn't want to see Janice again, but she'd handed me her sketch before I left. In case they need to remember what they broke, she'd said. At 5:58, Paul entered with the HOA briefcase in hand. He didn't look at me, but I saw the tension in his jaw. I didn't know if he was about to help or fold under pressure, but either way, the room would see. At exactly 6 p.m., Janice arrived. Her stride was sharp, her lipstick perfectly applied. She walked as if the injunction never existed, as if the suspension notice was a mistake someone else would pay for. But the hush that followed her inside wasn't reverence. It wasn't respect. It was calculation. The crowd was watching her now with new eyes. Paul cleared his throat. "This session is called under Article 9, Section C," he announced, voice louder than I expected, "to address community concerns regarding pending legal action involving board leadership. All homeowners present will be given time to speak." He glanced at me, just once, then back to the crowd. "Mr. Rourke, you may go first." I stepped forward and placed Kayla's sketch on the podium. There was a ripple through the crowd as I placed the sketch on the podium. Curiosity, confusion, a few hushed murmurs. I didn't speak right away. I let the silence work. Then I said, "My daughter Kayla drew this yesterday." The sketch was quiet, but haunting. A perfect rendering of the porch swing, the shadows beneath it exaggerated, elongated legs of charcoal black, one chain coiled tighter than the other, and just beside the edge of the wood slat, a tiny pair of glasses, barely visible. "She's 15, I continued, and recovering from spinal compression, 4 fractured ribs, and emotional trauma caused by a board member of this HOA. A wave of tension swept through the room. Someone in the back muttered a curse under their breath. "She didn't fall," I said flatly. "She was pushed, and the woman who did it then walked into a board meeting like nothing happened. Like she hadn't just chained a disabled girl to a wooden seat for not complying with her wardrobe preferences." Eyes flicked toward Janice. She didn't flinch. She stood in the corner beside Omar, arms folded, a small, smug smile tugging at the corner of her lips. But her posture had stiffened. I pulled out the printed handouts and passed them to the front row. They began circulating slowly, page by page, revealing timeline breakdowns, camera stills, HOA code violations, and side-by-side comparisons between Janice's written justifications and reality. "I served on a state regulatory board for 6 years, I said. "I've seen what petty power does to people, and I've seen what it costs when good people say nothing." I turned to face the rest of the room. "You don't have to like me, but you should ask yourselves a simple question. Who's next? What happens when she doesn't like the length of your son's hair? The way your wife decorates the garden? What happens when someone else's child says no and can't fight back?" A woman in the second row raised her hand. I thought the board said that was all just an exaggeration. I nodded. That's the word Janice used, exaggeration. But the hospital reports are real. The bruises on Kayla's spine, real. The security footage, also real. And now, Janice Winslow has been formally suspended from all HOA operations pending a legal injunction. That last part hit like a dropped hammer. Janice's smile thinned into a line. Paul stood from the board table slowly. I can confirm that the injunction is filed. The board has been made aware of its contents. And until further review, both Janice Winslow and Esteban Sanchez are to be considered suspended from all official financial, administrative, and disciplinary duties. A stunned hush overtook the room. Janice stepped forward. "This is absurd," she snapped. "David Rourke is manipulating this entire narrative. He's using his daughter to smear my name because I dared to enforce community standards." Omar looked like he wanted to vanish into his chair. "You chained a child, Janice," Paul said, voice firmer than expected. "You didn't write a citation. You used a metal restraint." Janice's voice cracked like a whip. "She was out of uniform. Her chest was—" "Stop," I said. "Just stop." My voice didn't rise, but it cut through her like glass. "You've done enough damage. You've written enough lies, silenced enough voices, and you're still doubling down. Because you can't admit you lost control, you don't care about community standards. You care about domination." Gasps broke through the room. The crowd shifted. People started murmuring to one another. The sway had begun. Janice turned on Paul. "You're going to let him talk to me like that?" Paul didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the assembled homeowners. "We'll open the floor to comments," he said. "Anyone who has been affected by board misconduct is welcome to share their experience." A hand shot up immediately, then another, then another. The first was a father of 3 who had been fined for parking half an inch over the curb. The second was a mother whose autistic son was scolded for humming too loudly during HOA-sanctioned quiet hours. Each voice was a tiny match, and with every testimony, the illusion of Janice's authority burned away a little more. She stood there, frozen, watching the power she'd wielded for years disintegrate in real time. I watched her chest rise and fall, faster now. Her gaze darted toward the door, then to Omar, but no one came to her defense. No one stood. And for the first time, Janice Winslow looked alone. The next speaker was someone I didn't expect, Mrs. Breckner, the elderly woman from the blue house on Lilac Bend. She walked slowly to the podium, gripping the edge with veined, shaking hands. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a thread pulled tight. "Last year, I got a letter from the HOA saying I had 5 days to remove the pink hydrangeas my late husband planted. Said they weren't part of the approved color palette." She paused. No one interrupted. "I tried to call, tried to ask for more time. I'm on fixed income. It was winter, and I couldn't afford the landscaping crew. I asked Janice for an extension." She turned her eyes to Janice, and I saw a flicker, something brittle and ancient, beneath the pain. She said, "Rules don't bend for nostalgia. Then fine me $300. A low rustle of discomfort moved across the room. Janice didn't react, but her lips pressed tightly together. "I paid it," Mrs. Breckner went on. "Sold my husband's old telescope to do it. And when I did, I wrote a letter, just asking for some compassion. She sent it back, stamped, denied." She stepped down. No one clapped. No one needed to. The next was a teenage boy, maybe 17. Tall, nervous, voice cracking slightly as he stepped forward. "Hi, I'm Eli Renshaw. I live on Willow. I just wanted to say, I used to ride my skateboard down the hill after school. Not doing tricks, just riding. One day Janice followed me home, said I was setting a tone. My mom got a warning notice that night, said I'd be banned from the park if I did it again." He looked toward her. "I stopped skating." There was no anger in his tone, just something hollow. I clenched my jaw. Kayla sat beside me, her gaze locked on. The boy. She hadn't spoken since we arrived, but I saw something shift in her posture, like she wasn't alone anymore. Testimony after testimony followed. A father whose daughter's lemonade stand was shut down because of unauthorized commerce. A woman fined for leaving a welcome mat with flowers that weren't HOA approved. A cancer survivor who received a citation for the color of her temporary ramp. It all came pouring out. And through it all, Janice didn't move, but Omar did. He rose slowly from his seat at the board table. His eyes weren't on the crowd. They were on Janice. "I knew," he said quietly. "I knew about some of this. Not all of it, but enough." A murmur swept through the room. I thought I could keep my head down, that it wasn't worth the fight. I've got kids, I've got a job. But that little girl, Kayla, she reminded me what cowardice looks like when you pretend it's wisdom. He turned to me. I should have said something the day it happened. I was there when she brought in the photos, saw her twist the story. Janice's eyes narrowed. "You're really going to betray me like this?" Omar's reply came without pause. "No, you betrayed this community. I'm just finally admitting it." Paul stood next. He looked older than he had an hour ago. Shoulders slumped, face pale, but his voice was clear. This board was created to serve the residents, not to become their jailers. I'm recommending we move forward with full external review of every citation issued under Janice's presidency, including a vote to permanently remove her from any administrative role. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. Then, without ceremony, a voice from the back called out, "Seconded." Another, thirded. A fourth, all in favor. Hands rose, dozens of them, including Paul's, including Omar's, including, I was certain, the same neighbors who had once stayed silent out of fear. Only one hand stayed down. Janice turned and walked out. No words, no threats. Just the slow, deliberate steps of a woman who realized that fear had finally stopped working. I watched the door close behind her. Beside me, Kayla exhaled, just once, like something inside her had finally unclenched. She reached over, found my hand, and said the first words she'd spoken all night. "Can we go sit on the swing?" I nodded, not to escape, but to reclaim it. The air outside the community center was thick with something unspoken. Release. As Kayla and I stepped into the night, the humidity clung to our skin, but it was the good kind, the kind that came after a storm, the kind that meant the worst had passed. We walked home in silence, hand in hand. Porch lights flickered on like little stars across Maple Grove, and for the first time in months, they didn't feel like searchlights waiting to catch us in violation. They felt like homes again. When we turned the corner onto our street, I saw it, our porch swing. Still there, still chained, still part of our front yard like it had been before Janice's war on aesthetics. But this time, it didn't look like a battlefield trophy. It looked like what it was. A place where Kayla used to sit on Saturday mornings with a book and a mug of cocoa, where I used to sip coffee and plan our weekend. Kayla let go of my hand and walked ahead. She didn't ask permission. She didn't hesitate. She stepped onto the porch, sat down on the swing, and pushed off with her feet. The chains creaked softly. Her head tilted back. Her eyes closed. I watched her in that moment. 10 years old, spine finally straight, chin no longer tucked in fear. And it struck me with a force I hadn't anticipated. This wasn't just about HOA politics. It wasn't about bylaws or citations. It was about the quiet war so many of us fight just to exist with dignity. I joined her on the swing, letting the wood groan beneath us. The old cushion was a little frayed, but it still held the shape of us like it remembered. Kayla didn't say anything at first. Then, "Do you think she'll try to come back?" I didn't need to ask who she meant. "No," I said. "She lost the only thing she ever really had, fear." Kayla nodded slowly. Then, to my surprise, she pulled something from her pocket. A small folded paper. I recognized the crease pattern. Her journal pages always looked like that when she tore one out. She handed it to me without looking. I unfolded it. It was a drawing, crude, done in pencil, but detailed. It showed our porch swing, but not just the swing. It showed the ramp we'd added last year after Kayla's surgery, the flowering vines we had tried to grow along the railing, the chalk art on the walkway, even the hummingbird feeders she loved watching in the mornings. Above it all, in careful block letters, home. I looked at her. "I wanted to remember it," she said, "in case they made us take it all away." I folded the drawing and tucked it in my wallet behind my license. "They're not taking anything from us again," I said. She leaned her head on my shoulder. The swing moved slowly back and forth, like time had slowed down just enough to let us catch up. Across the street, porch lights blinked off. One by one, Doors closed, dogs barked faintly in the distance. Maple Grove was settling in, but this time it wasn't curling in fear, it was resting. There was a knock on our gate. I turned. Omar? He looked sheepish, like a kid caught sneaking into the neighbor's yard. "Sorry," he said. "I know it's late, I just wanted to say thank you." Kayla looked up but didn't move. I gave her a nod and stood to greet him. "Not many people would have stood up the way you did," I told him. He looked away. "I waited too long." "But you still stood," I said. "That's what matters." He nodded. "Paul's filing the paperwork in the morning. Janice is officially barred from holding any. Board position again. We're also auditing the fines. Anyone improperly cited, especially your family, will be refunded." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "That'll mean a lot to people." He hesitated, then added, "Also, we're revoting the board. Paul's stepping down. Says it's time for someone new, someone with a little less tolerance for silence." I studied him. "You want me to run?" "No," he said. "Kayla already nominated you." I turned toward the swing. She smiled at me, not the least bit joking. I laughed. "Well, I guess we're both getting our voices back." The meeting to elect the new HOA board was held the following Saturday at the community clubhouse, same place where everything had started to unravel. But this time, it looked different. Not the building itself, same beige walls, same creaky chairs, same stale coffee in the corner, but the people. There was an energy in the air, not just tension, hope. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact for months now whispered in clusters. Familiar faces looked freer, like the weight of silence had finally been lifted. Kayla sat in the front row with Omar, her drawing folded neatly in her lap. She'd dressed herself in a bright yellow sundress with sunflowers on it. Her hair was tied back with the same ribbon she used to wear before her surgery, the one she stopped wearing when Janice made her feel ashamed of her body. She wore it like a flag now. I stood by the entrance for a while, watching people file in, Mr. Dalka from Lot 12, who used to get fined weekly for the color of his shed. The Ramirez twins, whose chalk drawings had once been labeled vandalism by Janice, and even the Montgomerys, who had supported the board for years, but now carried a quiet shame behind their nods. Paul stood near the podium, flipping through a clipboard, glancing at his watch. The sleeves of his button-down shirt were rolled to the elbow, sweat visible on the collar. He caught my eye and gave a small nod. He looked relieved, like someone who had finally let go of something too heavy to carry. He raised the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. We have quorum. We'll begin the vote for the new board slate now." He gestured for me to come forward. I wasn't planning to speak. I had written no speech. But something about seeing Kayla in the front row, with that quiet fire in her eyes, her drawing still clutched in her lap, made me step toward the mic. I looked around the room. "I never wanted to be part of this board," I said. "Not because I didn't care, but because I thought my job was to protect my family from the board, not become it." There were murmurs of agreement, but I've realized that the best way to protect something isn't to hide from power. It's to reshape it, to strip it of fear, to make it serve the people it governs, not silence them. I paused. "When my daughter was chained to our porch swing." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The board didn't investigate. They issued a warning. When our ADA ramp was vandalized, they called it a non-compliant structure. When we tried to defend our home, we were called agitators. But we weren't angry. We were grieving. For the community this used to be. For the safety we thought we had. Silence. "So no, I didn't want this seat, but I'll take it. Because it's not just about us anymore. It's about every neighbor who paid fines instead of groceries. Every kid who stopped playing outside. Every elder who was afraid to put up a holiday light." I stepped back. Kayla was smiling now. Paul resumed the mic. "Nominations have been reviewed. The vote is open. You can cast yours on the ballot slips being handed out." The votes were silent. Slips passed from hand to hand. Pens scribbled. A slow rhythm of change and motion. 15 minutes later, Paul returned to the mic with folded paper in hand. "By majority vote, the new HOA president is David Rourke." A beat of silence, then applause. It started slow. From the Ramirez twins, then the Dalkas, then Omar, then, like dominoes, everyone. Kayla didn't clap. She stood, walked to the front, and handed me the drawing. "This belongs here now," she said. I took it. My hand shook. Omar found a thumbtack and pinned it to the community bulletin board behind the podium. No longer hidden in a wallet, no longer a secret. It read the same as ever: home. But now the whole room could see it, and maybe, for the first time, they finally believed it. The next morning, Maple Grove didn't feel like the same place. The streets were quieter, but not in that tense, watchful way. More like a collective exhale after years of holding breath. Lawns glistened with dew, sprinklers clicked in rhythm, and the flag by the mailbox swayed lazily in the morning breeze. I brewed coffee, poured 2 cups, and stepped onto the porch. Kyla was already there, legs tucked beneath her, sketchbook open again. The swing creaked as I sat beside her. That familiar wooden groan we used to joke was the house's heartbeat. She looked over, smiling softly, then glanced at the empty street. "It feels lighter," she said. "Yeah," I replied, "because people finally saw the truth." She flipped the sketchbook toward me. This time, it wasn't just the porch swing she'd drawn. It was the entire street, our home in the center, the others around it, children running, dogs barking, neighbors chatting. She'd even drawn Omar watering his roses, and Mrs. Breckner standing on her lawn with her hydrangeas blooming bright pink again. Above it all, in bold pencil strokes, she'd written, "We stayed." I stared at it for a long moment. "That's better than any title I could have given this." Kayla grinned. "I think it's what they need to remember." As if on cue, footsteps crunched on the walkway. It was Omar, holding a folded newspaper. "You two made front-page community news," he said with a smirk. Headline says, "Maple Grove elects victim's father as new president amid scandal. Not bad for your first day." I laughed. "Did they get Kayla's name right?" "Every letter." She blushed, pretending not to care, but I saw it. The pride she'd been missing for months, now flickering behind her calm expression. Omar leaned against the railing. "You've got a lot of people waiting to see what you'll do next. You might actually fix what we broke." "We'll fix it together," I said. "Starting with the bylaws. No resident should live under fear of their own board." He nodded. "I'll second that." Then his voice softened. "I'm sorry again. For not speaking sooner." I looked at him. "You did when it mattered." He gave a short, grateful nod and left, the morning light catching on his glasses as he walked away. Kayla watched him go, then turned back to me. "Do you think people can really change?" I thought of Janice. The silence after the gavel fell. The way she had stood in that room, small not from defeat, but from truth stripping away everything she'd built. "I think people can learn," I said. "Change is harder, but learning, that's where it starts." She nodded, satisfied with that answer, and reached for her cocoa mug. The swing moved again, soft and rhythmic. Across the street, Mrs. Breckner was tending her flowers. She caught my eye, waved gently, then bent to adjust one of the pots, pink hydrangeas glowing like defiance. Further down, the Renshaw boy was skating again, careful at first, then laughing as he sped down the hill. Life was finding its way back. Kayla rested her head on my shoulder. "Do you miss who we were before all this?" "No," I said quietly. "I think we're finally who we were meant to be." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Somewhere, a wind chime rattled, the sound delicate but steady. I thought about how easily everything had fractured, how something as small as a rule could spiral into violence, and how something as simple as truth could start to heal it. When Kayla closed her sketchbook, she whispered, "Can we invite everyone for dinner, like before?" I smiled. "Let's do it, but this time, no HOA approval needed." Her laugh filled the porch, the kind of sound that pushes darkness out of corners. For a while, we just sat there, listening to the world breathing again. The porch swing creaked, the coffee cooled, and I realized something simple and profound. Winning wasn't about vengeance. It was about peace, about rebuilding what fear tried to destroy. Kayla's voice broke the quiet. "You're gonna make this place better, Dad." I looked out at Maple Grove, the light spilling across every lawn, and said, "No, kiddo, we already did. Subscribe and tell me, have you ever had to stand up to power just to feel safe in your own home? Because sometimes that's where real change begins."